Okay, so right now, this is fully integrated with the API for the fetches, for the gets, and this zone creation form should also be connected. So let's go ahead and just confirm that. So I'm going to do another one, upper east side, 10023. Okay, so that worked over here, and then if I reload, it's still there. So that's been persisted to the database, so that's good to go. So now I'm going to create the same functionality for the comments, and then we'll take it from there. So all right, so here's my current submit comment function, and right now it just updates it locally in the state. So we want to remove that, pretty much all of it, and we want to now replace this with the API call that sends a post request to the comment endpoint. So first thing we need to do is import the API manager, which I already have, and then we want to run the post request. So the API manager takes a post request, which requires a URL body in the callback. So here we pass in the URL, which is just /API/comment. The body, that's the package, right? That's what we're sending to the server. So that's going to be this guy right here, this.state.comment. And then don't forget the callback. And as usual, the callback takes an error and a payload. So error and response. And then do what we always do. Handle the error, check the response, etc., etc., etc. So if error, usual room. 10. Okay, and then for now we're just going to console log it, because remember what I said yesterday about just getting something to show up. So like I did yesterday, it's entirely possible I mess this up. So we want to make sure that this even shows up, and then we'll worry about updating the state and all that good stuff. So right now, if I reload this, pop up the console, test comment, this is a test, and timestamp. All right, so this is interesting. So remember how we put this timestamp field in here because we needed sort of an artificial means of getting any timestamp inside the comments, right? But now here we don't need it because where is the timestamp actually going to be assigned?
On the front end.
Other side, the back end. Because here we're saying the user is inserting the timestamp. The user doesn't really do that. The timestamp is assigned right when the entity is generated, right? That's assigned on the back end. So this field shouldn't even be here anymore. This is no longer even necessary. So let's go ahead and get rid of that. So the timestamp field should just be gone entirely. And then don't forget we had an update timestamp function just to quickly have a way to actually assign a timestamp. So we don't need this anymore either. Right, so our code is a little bit less now. It's good. So we want to re-render. And this is a more accurate way. So here we have a test and test comment, and then submit. And here's the confirmation down here. See, the timestamp is null though. That's not good. So let's figure this guy out. So what happened is here we sent up a timestamp anyway from the initial state. So this test was unsuccessful. We have to try it again. So let's. What happened is that in the initial state we still had a timestamp key. So we got to get rid of that too, right? So Let's try it again. Okay. Well, I mean, it was quasi-successful. Like, here's the test comment, but there's no timestamp. It's just rendering as null. So now if I do another one, test 2, this is another test. Now we have a timestamp right here. And that's assigned from the backend. And that's what we want to see. So now the creation has been confirmed, fully confirmed. Good? So if I reload this page, I should see this new comment with the timestamp. And there it is. And that's what we want to see. Did all that make sense? I kind of just flew through that. But okay. So initially here, down here, we had a field called timestamp. Right? We did that because we needed an artificial way of inserting a timestamp into the comment. But we don't need it anymore because the timestamp is actually created on the server. The server does that for us. So we can just get rid of that field completely. Right? So we did that. However, what I forgot was that in the initial state, all the way up here, this comment right here, we had a timestamp value here already, which we also don't need. So we have to get rid of that so that the backend doesn't use that as the timestamp value. So what was happening before is that the backend was taking the timestamp from here, which was just an empty string, and saying, oh, that's our timestamp. But that's inaccurate. The timestamp is whenever we create the comment, the backend says, whatever that moment in time is, that's your timestamp. So if we send up a timestamp key in the package, the backend will defer to that. It'll say, oh, that's your timestamp. Okay. So we have to remove it to prevent that from happening. And then as a result, when I create another comment now, the timestamp is assigned by the backend. And this is what we want to see. Right? So here, this is no longer happening, but we do want this to happen, just not over here. It should happen in here, right? The success block, the completion. So at this juncture, line 48 and below, right here, what should I do next? Somebody give me some direction here. What should I do next?
Do a let updated list.
Whoops. All right, so we create a copy of the current list because this is what we want to update. Right? We want to update the list. So we have to make a copy. Right? And then what do we want to do with it?
Push the result out.
So how do I do that, Rob?
Updated list dot push. Response result.
How do you know it's result instead of results?
It's one comment.
Yes, and furthermore, you can visually confirm that by the payload right here. Oh, well, I erased it. But when you check the payload, it literally says result instead of results. So here, we want to access that key. And then what do I do next?
Save it.
How?
It's list.setStage.
And then
The list is the updated list.
what is the significance of that command? What will this command do to the component?
It refreshes the component.
Yeah, it'll trigger a reload. This will trigger a reload of the component. This is the most important command of React, set state. It's extremely important to understand that. It's called React for a reason, because it reacts to changes in state. That's it. That's the core of React. That's how it works. It reacts to changes in state. So whenever you make a change to the state, the component reacts. That's literally why it's called React. So every time you make a change to state, the component will react to it, it'll reload, or more appropriately, re-render. It will do all this again, render, with the updated state. Okay? Does that make sense? So now when I post a new comment, now what is supposed to happen? What are we expecting to see when I press submit?
Your comment, creating a copy.
Right here, right. So if that doesn't happen, it fails. So, and there it is. Good? So the set state is what made that happen. That's the key thing to understand. Okay, so that's why I say that's the most important command of React. That's what literally makes the component react to changes. Okay? So that was at the tail end of last night's class. Does everyone have this working?
Did, but I didn't do it. Go back to it.
If you didn't do it this way, you did it wrong. So make sure you did it this way.
I'm checking it.
Yeah.
But it worked. Just
Doesn't matter.
badly.
Gonna do it this
Oh
way.
yeah, I have
Go ahead, go ahead. I just want to see it from 72 there. Or from,
Yeah, so let me just clean up a little bit.
I
So-
didn't write this, sorry. Instead of this dot state dot comment, I did updated comment and it worked.
that's what I did.
Online.
Oh, so this is the question we had yesterday. So here, you mean right here?
No, on
No, no.
35.
Yeah.
Instead of this state comment, I put updated comment.
And declare the variables above it.
Right.
That's what I had.
Wait. Oh, if I understand correctly, what you did was let updated comment equals object
Dot
assign.
assign, yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, this isn't wrong. It's a little bit of overkill. It's certainly not wrong though.
Not best practice.
Well, no, it's not necessarily wrong. It's not best practice either. The question is, why would you ever do it? Like, why did we do it this way last time? Right? I'm guessing you just took it from the previous example. That's fine. So the question is, why did we do that? So here, by creating a copy here, that gives us the opening to manipulate that copy, to pre-process it. So I probably had to do some pre-processing. I was probably taking a string and converting it to an array, right?
Yeah.
In order to format it properly for the backend. In this scenario, the comment from the state is already formatted accurately. There's no need to pre-process. It's just ready to go. So we can just send it right through, right? So it's not like one's best practice and one's the other. It's more like, why did we do this in the first place? So here, do we need any pre-processing? No, but like this isn't. I wouldn't say this is a bad move. It's just this would be considered like very, very cautious. You know, you're better safe than sorry. You may as well just do that because we might have to do some pre-processing eventually. And so we're ready for that. So this is not like a wrong thing to do. Okay. The important thing to understand is why did we do it in the first place? Okay. Good. Everyone got this working?
My timestamp isn't showing.
One thing you want to do, or one thing you want to remember, is that we have the first thing we did in this project is make an API. We can always use that API as sort of a reference manual, right? So if your timestamp is not showing up, there's a couple of things that might be happening. It might not be saved at all. You might not have a timestamp stored on your backend, or your React code might be messing up the render of the timestamp. Those are two different problems. So right now what you want to do is check your backend. And this is literally the data stored in the backend for comments, right? So if I look at my most recent comment down here, right here, you will see that I do in fact have a timestamp. So the question is, do your comments have timestamps?
Oh, it looks like at a certain point, timestamp becomes null.
Yeah, so the answer is no, they don't.
Yeah.
When you post your timestamp, when you post your comment, the timestamp is not being saved. So in all likelihood, on the top of your file, your component, you still have a timestamp being tracked in here. You want to get rid of that.
So, okay, so the reason why we don't want it here is because
Because
we're
here,
not creating like a state copy.
no, here, what we're doing here, this entire object right here, lines 10 through 13, that represents the entire package we're sending to the server. The server will take all of it. Like whatever you give it, it'll take it. So if I put in a timestamp, if I put that in there, the server is going to take it and put it inside the database. My point is we don't want that to happen. The timestamp shouldn't come from us, the client. It should come from the server. The server is going to assign the timestamp, right? But if we send a timestamp with the package, the server's like, oh, you already got one. Here, I'll just use that instead. That's how the server operates. It just says here, oh, you already have a timestamp in the package. Therefore, I will not assign it. And I will use your timestamp instead. How do we know it's going to do that? Because inside the comment schema, the timestamp default is now. That's the default. What does default mean? If there's nothing there, we will put this instead. That's what default means. But if there is something there, we're going to use that. So the default never triggers. That's where that behavior is being determined. Does that make sense? So if we have a timestamp here, the default won't go. The default won't happen. The server will determine the default is not necessary, and it will use whatever you put in there. No matter what it is, that's your timestamp now. Does that make sense? That's why we want to remove timestamp. Okay, so this works on both sides now. Posting a comment and posting a new zone. Does everyone have that? Still no good?
Is it in your schema?
It is.
And you took it out of the original
Oh, it
state?
could be.
Make sure you're running Webpack.
Yeah. What pack should be running? I'll try.
Okay, I'm going to go through a few more sort of general React concepts. So remember I said that in React you're basically just putting together a series of components. Well, this right here, this should actually also be a component. This create like form, right? So we want to create another component called create comment, and that should be what goes here. Okay? This is better, considered better React architecture. Okay? So what we want to do right now is go into the directory. So right now, a key question is what kind of component is it going to be? Right, is it going to be a layout, a container, or a presentation? Certainly not going to be a layout because the layout's the whole thing. Right? That's like sort of the page. Right? So the real question is it a container or a presentation? Is it a view or a container component? So I'll just tell you right now, this is going to be a presentational component. It's going to be basically a view component. Okay? Because remember, we're going to put it inside the comments. Right? We're going to put it inside here. The comments is a container component. So you don't want to put a container inside of a container. That would be just weird. Containers are responsible for accessing the data and passing them down to views or presentational components. That's how you want to think of it. Okay? So this, what are we inside right now? The comments container. It connects to the data. The best way, well, this is not really a good way, but if you're coming from an MVC background, this is as close to a controller as you're going to find in React. It connects to the data, and then it passes down the data selectively to views. So we're going to add another component right here, called create comment, right? And all of this will be replaced by the create comment component, which is going to have to be a presentational component because we're already inside the container. Okay, this is like a React way of thinking. So this is how you want to start getting used to the way of organizing your components. So we want to go into the presentation directory. And create comment component, just like that. Okay, and then inside the create comment, we just set up a basic React component like we usually do. So let's go ahead and do that. And for now, just leave it at that. And then we want to import this create comment component into the container and then render that in the container. So far, are you with me?
Yeah.
So let's go back to the comments container and do that. Oh, I'm sorry, real quick, before I go ahead and do that. Inside the presentation directory, I'm going to create an index where I can export all of these components in a single file. That's just a better, cleaner way of doing it. Okay, so inside the presentation directory, we create an index, and then inside the index, we import create comment. So we want to import this guy and all three of the major components into the index.
You have to import styles too.
No, because consider again what the purpose of this is to export these components to other directories. The style
Or already being
are inside, it stays inside that directory. It's like a private file, you can think of it that way.
And each one of those is already accessing styles. So
Yeah.
those styles come.
Well, it's not really the way you want to think of it though. It's just that you don't need the style in any other directory. Because this style sheet right here only refers to what's inside the directory. So you don't need to export it. However, these components will be used elsewhere. So we have to export them. That's how you want to think of it. So where was I? Okay, so going back to the container, here You see where it says import comment on line 2? We can now do it like this, like that. Which means we can also do create comment, like that. So that we don't have to do like 10 lines. Do you see the process here? It's just a more concise way of importing multiple modules. Right, this saves our import statements from being like 25 lines. Like typically you want to import a couple components from each directory. Okay, so right now I'm checking in on Webpack, right? Just make sure Webpack's always happy, right? And then so far so good. And then now we take the create comment and render that down here. Just stick it down there, and let's just see if it even shows up. So run the server, and there it is right there. Right there. Right? That means it worked. Because remember, it was just one line of text, right? So that means it's showing up accurately. Good? So now that we've confirmed that it's showing up properly, we can take all this stuff and just dump it into the create comment component. So let's go ahead and do that. So those 3 inputs should go away. And then we put them in here instead. However, this will break because look, we have an update username, update body. These functions are no longer defined in this component. So this will break. So let's just, for now, let's just remove it so that there's no like, we don't want to fix that right now. Okay, so we just remove the function callbacks for now. Good. So when I reload, now I'm back to where I was. However, this is now connected to nothing. We just lost the core functionality of creating a comment. Right? It seems like a step backwards. But before we get to that, let's make sure that this is working on your end.
Create comment or regular?
Do you clear all that data by doing the Mongo clear, the system index clear thing?
Oh, yeah.
What are you trying to do?
If I wanted to clear all that data, do I?
Oh, you want to remove it? Yeah, let's do that right now.
It's what we've done before, right? Where it's like you
Yeah, but it's not called clear. It's called drop.
drop.
Drop. Right. So again, keep in mind what we've done is we've created a component where this stuff shows up, but we just lost the functionality. So that's a bit of a problem. It seems like we took a step backwards, which we kind of did, but this is better architecture. So now the question becomes, well, how do we reconnect the functionality? How do we get it back to working order? Okay. So before I get into that, are we together? Good? Okay, so what we want to do is create the functions in here where when the user types into the inputs, the values are captured, right? So let's do that. So constructor. So here, what am I doing? I'm setting up a state for this component, only for this component, nobody else cares about it, where we track the comment. And then when I type into here, I want to update this comment, right? So all those update functions should apply to this state right here, right? So I'm going to create a function called update comment. And I'm going to connect these two input fields to that one function. So on change, update comment, okay, just like before. And instead of creating a separate comment for update username and update text, I'm just going to use one function both times, just like we did last night. So it's less code. And we need to use the ID attribute to distinguish between those two fields. So ID, username, text,
Things, body.
body. And then for now, we're just going to console log like we always do. So that's it for now, just to make sure this even works, right? We got to make sure everything is properly connected. All right, let's try it. So reload the page, go down here, start typing. There we go, username equals that, and body equals that. Perfect. So got that connected. Okay, you see how we're just sort of moving pieces into another component? That's all we're really doing right now. So now we want to update the actual comment itself. So this part is worth going through step by step. How do we do that? Right, we want to change the state now. So how do I do that the right way?
Let updated comment equal object.
Right.
Curly braces. This that statement comment.
Right. Make the copy. Mess around with the copy. So we're going to see that right now. And then do what?
Save it.
How?
Setting the state.
Mm-hmm. So I'm resetting the state every time I type into the input field, right? Right here, I'm setting the state. I just reset the state like 30 times, right? Which means I'm calling re-render 30 times. Every time I type a letter, I'm re-rendering the component. I'm reloading the entire component. That seems really wasteful. That's horribly inefficient, right? To reload the component every time I type into it. So why is that not really happening here?
React knows when there's actually something that's going to change the visual appearance.
Correct.
Only then.
So we don't actually reload the component unless what happens?
There's
A visual change. And then the component will reload. So at first, this seems like a step backwards in terms of efficiency, but it's a massive step forward. It only reloads if the component is visually changed.
So what is considered a visual change? 'Cause
Literally a visual
like,
change.
wouldn't typing going across in the box be a visual change?
No, this is not the DOM. This is a console. Like the DOM is the visual consideration. So if I do, and don't copy this, just watch me. So now the component is reflecting the comment's body at all times. So if I reload, if I type into here, of course it's not working, so let me try it again. What am I doing wrong here? Let's see. Let's see. Comment body. Stupid.
Yeah.
That's the body. That's the username. Idiot. All right. So yeah. So here now we're changing the DOM. So these reloads are actually being triggered. Now the important thing is that you're not even reloading the entire component. You're only reloading the part of the HTML that needs it. So even when you are triggering the reloads, it'll only do like the part that you need. Does that make sense? Only that one p tag is reloading over and over again. So even when you are kind of hammering away at the reload, even when you are doing that, even in that sense, it's pretty efficient in that you're only hitting, reloading the part that needs to be reloaded. So in this case, one p tag. So that's why it seems very like smooth. It's very fluid. Like this is not being reloaded. Only that is. Good? All right. So now we need a function for this guy right here, for this button. So for now, all it's going to do is console log the current comment. So let's go submit comment. and bind this button to that function. So and then just console log, same as always. Okay.
For functions like on click, are mobile browsers able to interpret that?
Yeah, this is just regular HTML. This will all work on a mobile browser just fine. Okay, so when you try that, test, this is a test comment. We want to see that. So we're kind of just redoing what we did last night. So none of this should be new. So how are we doing so far? Okay. So now here is where conceptually you can get off path. You can get out of pocket here. So this is very this can be very confusing if you're not thinking about it the right way. Most people here would import the API manager and call the post on the submit right here. And then when the post call comes back, it'll take the result, and then you have the new comment. Can anyone identify the problem with that approach?
It will hang.
Well, you can just make the request.
Well, it's a presentation. It's not supposed to listen to changes of state.
Yeah. So here, I can import the API manager and call the post, and then send this up with the post. And that's what sort of most beginners would think to do. Including myself when I first started learning this. It's really a matter of understanding where the data belongs. So the problem is that that's not where the data is supposed to go. This presentational component should not deal with the application state data. Let me rephrase that. That was very poorly phrased. So here, which component maintains the list of comments? Comments container. Are we in that one right now? Incorrect. Yeah, we're not in that one. So even if I do make the API call, I'm going to get the result, but I'm going to be in the wrong component anyway. How can I take that result and put it in the container component? I mean, you can make that work, but that's not the right thought process. You with me? So what we want to do, so keep in mind, this component is sort of nested inside of another component, the container. That's why they're called containers. So this guy right here wants to take that data and pass it back to the container. And then the view component, the presentational component is like, here you go, I'm done. This is as far as I'm going to go with it. Like, that's pretty much as smart as they get. Like, here, just take it. It should have no API integration, no state management, none of that crap. It just says, here's your data, I'm done. So we want to take this and pass it back to the container. You with me? And then the container does the work. The containers are these smart components. It'll make the API call, it'll process the data, it'll update the state, etc., etc., etc. We good? So what we want to do now is figure out how do we make that chain happen? Like, how do we connect it? So what we want to do inside the container right here is we want to pass down a property on submit. But that's not a good one because that's a reserved one. So on create. Now, you know how you pass down a property like a name or like an object? You can also pass in entire functions. So you can say submit comment, right? This entire function can be passed in to the component as a property. So this dot submit comment. We still have to bind it, otherwise it gets all screwy. Now, before I move on, I'm going to take the current submit comment function, right? And we're going to comment all this out. Because we're going to have to rewrite pretty much, well, not all of it, some of it. And so we're going to comment this out for now. And just leave a console log and that's it. So far, so good. So
Can you explain the
yeah, we're not done yet. But so what we've done is we've created a property called onCreate, and we're passing down into this property another function, which is the actual submit function.
that's going to come from the create comment component?
That's what we're about to do. So if we go back to the create comment component, right here where it says submit comment, we now have to call that function, which we haven't done yet. So right here we have to do this dot props dot on submit, but call it as a function. We passed in a property as a function, so we're now invoking that function right here.
It's the
Well,
prompts
even though we
dot
called it
submit.
onCreate.
Messing up my own code.
So from just the way to think of it, when in the comments container, we've created a property called onCreate that we're now defining in create comment, and we want this function to run whenever create comment is loaded.
No. So the container has a function called submit comment. And that's basically the same as what we already have there. It's going to be almost the same. But for now, it's a comment. It's a function called submit comment.
Yeah.
Submit comment. Submit comment. We're passing that function down to a view component. So we're passing a function as a property to that guy. That's the function we're passing it off. And the property name is onCreate. So inside the create comment component, when it's ready to go, we have to trigger that function onCreate. And that'll pass it back to the container. As create comment.
Passing the data back up to the container.
We want to, we're going to in a few minutes. But right now we have to confirm that the connection was even successful. So you're kind of on the next step, which is we got to get that data back up to the container. We haven't done that yet. We're going to. But right now, we just want to make sure that the functions are simply connected, right? Because obviously nothing matters. That's why I commented all this out and only left that behind, right? So let's go ahead and confirm that. At this point, it would not be unusual for me to mess this up, right? So let's see if that worked. So now when you press the button, you see two console logs. Do you see it? This is from the view, I'm sorry, the presentational component. This is from the container. So we had one function calling another function. That's what just happened. Okay? Make sure you see the same thing, otherwise none of this is going to work. So we have one function right here, which triggered another function right here. Good? So now we have to focus on what Rob was saying. Like, how do we pass this data up to that guy? Well, it's actually, you pretty much already know it. It's just not immediately obvious. Here, inside the view component, we can just pass this guy back as an argument right there. And then in the container, make sure you're receiving that comment.
And the state of the comment is what it is because we've set it equal to updated comment.
Oh, right here in this function right here.
Right.
Well, that's what we spent doing it for, right? So right here, we're passing the comment into the function. So you got to make sure you're receiving it on the other end. So in the container, we make sure we have an argument. That's what we're passing back. And then, as always, just do a console log, right? Notice how this time, though, it's just console log the comment, not this .state.comment. Because this is being received from the presentational component.
Okay.
The presentational component
So
is creating
Yeah,
the state, so we're capturing the state. So
Capturing its own state.
right.
Every component has its own state. And then there's what's called the application state, which we'll get to.
So it's component state. It's considered component state. And when you do that, you only have to do comment instead of this state.com.
No, we don't want to use this
I'm
.state.com.
saying,
Yeah,
that's
why
what I'm
not?
saying, because it's component state and not application.
We passed it as an argument, so we don't need to put it here.
Yeah, this guy shouldn't even exist anymore. Right? We should actually just get rid of it. So up here, that should just go. And then we just try it again. So you see now how it shows up twice. This is from the view component. This is from the container. So now the container has successfully received the data from the view component. It's like the view component passed it back up. And then the container does all the heavy lifting. It makes the API calls. It'll update the state. It does all that stuff. Oops. Is that
Click on your create comment.
which one?
Sorry, the presentation create comment.
And then as far as this component goes, it's effectively done. Like, it's done its job. Like, here's your data. You do whatever you want with it.
And then go to your container. And your submit comment.
Go back to your create comment.
So the important takeaway here is that this property right here is a function. We passed off a function as a property. It doesn't have to be just values. You can pass them entire functions and then use those functions at the appropriate times. And the other important takeaway here is not to make the API call here. That's in the wrong spot. It's very easy to do. So you want to make sure you're not misunderstanding that. So like I said, people who don't understand the React way of thinking quite yet, and this included me about a year ago, so it's not like a beginner thing, it's just how familiar are you with React. The impulse would be to import the API manager here and make the API call here. That is incorrect. So you want to understand that anything data processing wise should happen inside containers. Good?
So we have right now 3 components for the comment. The container component, and then the comment, presentation, and then create comment. Create comment and comments deal with state changes. But how come comment is sort of just...
Oh, this doesn't, it's just like an even dumber component. It just renders a comment. That's its only job. So the create comment one does have to do some manipulation. Now we could set up, where the hell did I put it? We could set up state here and just for a good measure, like the constructor and set the state, but we just wouldn't do anything with it. This component right here has no other responsibility than to literally just show the data. It's like a window. That's it. Just look at it. That's it. This one has a little bit more responsibility. Not a lot, but a little. Like it has to capture user input. It has to capture that data and then pass it back to the container. So we have to do a little bit more work here. Not a lot, but a little. And we have to capture whatever data the user is inputting and then send it back to the container. Here, we could set that up. We just wouldn't use it. That's all. This guy's only job is just to show the data, and that's it. So keep in mind, we're not done yet, because what do we have yet to do?
Pass the
Display
statements
it on the
to the
front.
We
tables.
didn't actually create the comment yet, right? So we got to go back to the container. We want to restore all this functionality. But there's one change we want to make.
Change this instead of comment to comment.
Yeah, that's it. We want to make that change, and that's it.
So,
And for good measure, I'm gonna do it this way, just so you can see what it used to be and what it is now.
say quickly one more time why you can use comment as an argument and just use comment now.
Well, this guy is coming from here.
And that guy is coming from the other side.
Yeah, the create comment component, the view component. It's being passed back up.
It's just a variable that can be
Yeah, it's just it.
Just basic.
Like you're probably not using the right one, so
Did you enter line 36?
Yeah, I just commented this out just so you can compare and contrast. Just so like this is the wrong way, this is the right way.
Yeah, I didn't have that line at all though on my old one.
All right, so just put it in. Are we good? So again, really the main thing to understand here is whose responsibility is it to deal with the data, right? We're creating a new comment here. We're posting data to the server, and which components are responsible for things like that. Which ones?
Say again?
So here we're creating a new comment, like for real. We want to hit the server, we want to hit the backend. Which components are responsible for dealing with that? Containers, right? That's why they're called smart components. So if we did that in the view, it's in the wrong spot. So that's the main thing to understand here. Good. So now let's actually try, because we still haven't tested it. So this really goes back into more this. And there it is, right there. So this really goes more into the idea of like how to think in React. That's really the main gist I'm trying to get across here. You know, I could have just as easily taught it as hitting the API from the view, and it would have worked, and it would have worked fine, and we could make it work. But that's not the React way of thinking. Okay, so you got to like sort of train your brain into thinking the React way.
Make
And this
everything
is
as
it.
modular as possible.
That's part of it. I mean, that's just generally good programming, though. Like, that's just programming, object-oriented programming. The React way is, what do containers do? What do views do? What do presentation components do? Right? And that's more of a React way of thinking as opposed to, like, Angular. You want to make your Angular code modular as well. You want to make your iOS code modular. You want to make all your code modular. So what distinguishes React psychology versus Angular psychology? Right? So it's really a different way of understanding the responsibilities of different parts of code.
Is your container?
This is the container. Excuse me. So given this sort of paradigm that we just set up, what do you suppose is the next logical step of the project?
For the zones.
Right. Set up another component called what?
Create zone.
Right. And then put that inside the which container?
Zones.
And then what do we assign to the create zone component? A property, which will trigger the create function, just like we did here, and then that will send the API call back to the container, etc. Does that make sense? Okay. So once you get this working, make the corresponding adjustment for zones. Create zones.
Can you go to your create comment?
So everyone do that.
And is that, can you go to word wrap? Is it event target?
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Let me just do it real quick. Okay, everyone do that. Take about 20 or so minutes. We'll say about 7:30 is a reasonable target for that. Okay. All right. So actually, one thing I forgot to do before the assignment was, if you look at my comments container, and yours probably is the same right now. If you look at the comments container, we still have functions back here that relate to creating a comment, right? Like update username, update body. That's back when the container was where we actually created the comment. These functions are no longer necessary, right? Because then they are now happening inside the create comment component. So this is just useless now. We should just get rid of these. So I'm going to get rid of these. And make sure I didn't break anything. So let me just reload. All right, cool. Okay. So before I get on to the next thing, anyone need some clarification? Anything not working?
With the assignment we just did?
Yeah, or just anything in general. Just
Can you go over how you make it? Because my create zone, it's saying it's not defined.
okay. Let's go ahead and do it. So I have to go to the components, And create zone is going to be a view component, right? So we want to go to the presentation, cd presentation, create a create zone component. Every time I create a new component, the very next thing I do is I import it into the index, because I always forget that. So I just like make that a reflex action now. So I just go to the index and I do create zone, because oftentimes I'll do like an hour of work and then forget this part, and I'll be like, why is this not working? Like that. That's why. So this is so easy to forget that I do it first, just get it out of the way. And then in the create zone, we set up import React component from React class create zone. Notice how I type this out every time, even though by now we can kind of just copy and paste from previous components. The reason I do this is to build a habit of just, you want to get this part just drilled into your memory to where you're not even thinking about it. So just get in the habit of doing that. It's worthwhile. So here, of course I just messed it up. So create zone. All right, so we have that. Want to go to the zones, and then we want to import this, create zone, like so. So now we have it imported, and then render it down on the bottom, just like we did last time. So right now we're just rendering the component, and that's it.
You did it in index.js too, right?
Yeah, so I just do that right away so that you don't forget. So for now, just make sure that that renders. Okay, so there it is right there. So we have it showing up. So obviously that's step one. So you have to show up. You got it working?
Yeah.
Okay. Was it the index?
Yeah, I didn't import it at the top of the zones.
Right. So yeah, usually I get those things out of the way like first, because they're so easy to forget, right? Like you don't want that to hinder your progress for an hour. Like you don't want to lose an hour because you forgot an import statement. That just ruins your day. So at least it ruins my day. So you want to get that out of the way, and then we get to the actual work. So here we get all this stuff inside the create zone component. We don't have any of these functions in here, so that will crash it. So get rid of that. Re-render. Everything's good. And then now let's implement those functions. So set the constructor. We want to set up a state for the new zone. Constructor, state, yep, that looks good. I'm going to just cheat a little bit. All right, so now the function is defined. So I'm going to put that guy back. Pass in the event. I just put the functions back. You guys see that, right? And then updated. Assign object. Assign. Create the copy, update the copy, reset the state. Update the copy, reset the state. reload, test it, watch it crash. That's what the other Forrest used to say. Remember? He was like, just try it, watch it break. That was pretty funny. And then submit comment. Submit zone, excuse me. And here it's on click, right? It's not on change. Submit zone, don't forget to bind it. This state zone test zone 1000. Good. So it's all being captured. So that part is all set to go. So the view component is doing its job. Now the hard part is not hard part, but the new part is passing it back up to the container. So we want to go back to the container and pass off a property, which I'm going to call onCreate. And remember, you can call these whatever you want. So like onCreate is not like a special word, right? I just picked it because, right? And then we probably already have a function for it called addZone, which we do, right? So we pass that guy, this dot addZone dot bind dot this. But don't forget, it now needs to receive the new zone, right? So we put in that argument right there. And we don't want to do that anymore because this is no longer the data that we're using to create the zone. So we want to do it like that. So this one required some pre-processing. Now, here's a very interesting question though. We're pre-processing the zone here, right? But we didn't make a copy. Why not? This is not the state. It's just another JSON object, right? It's just another JSON object being passed in right here. There's nothing to do with the state of this component. So mutating this really is not like out of bounds. It's just another object. Does that make sense? This zone property right here, yeah, object, argument, it's not part of the state. So mutating this it's just another JSON object. So changing this around is not like a bad thing to do. However, if you're really paranoid about it, you can feel free to make the copy. Just don't forget to copy the zone argument rather than the one from state. And then this code can just literally remain the same. So this is what I meant earlier about how like that's a super cautious move. It's not wrong. It's just very like better safe than sorry, right? So would I do it this way? Yeah, probably. But it wasn't wrong the other way either. Okay, this is considered like the safer way. So I probably should have just done it this way off the bat. Okay, and let me try it. Test zone 1000. Submit zone. What did I forget to do? Call the actual function. Right? So I just did a bunch of work and I didn't use it. That's what happened right there. So here, this dot props on create. And then we just try again. Test zone 1000. Beautiful. Are we good?
So for the zones, you don't do the pre-processing of the array issue in the create zone. Should it be there or should it stay where it is?
That's a pretty good question. I mean, there's no right answer. Like, it worked fine right here. The real thought process here is, who do you think is ultimately responsible for that? That's more of an opinion, to be honest. There's no right or wrong. But Rob brings up a very good point. Like, maybe it should belong in here. Like, this guy, create zone, is responsible for preparing the zone to be created. So when you pass it off to the container should be like, here's the data that I have to pass off to the API. Right? So like, ultimately, who is responsible? It could be pretty convincingly argued that it should happen right here. And I would probably agree with that. So if you want to put the pre-processing here, by all means, like, that's probably the right spot. I'm not going to spend time on it, but those are good questions. Like that, there's no right or wrong. It's more like, who is primarily responsible for preparing the data accurately, right? So the zones container, right? It does what it sounds like. It contains the zones, and it just renders a list of zones. So when you create, it shouldn't really be worried about like pre-processing. It should happen inside the create component. It's not like a huge thing, but however, I am going to get rid of this now because it's just not being used anymore. So let's get rid of that. We don't need the update zone function anymore. And that's pretty much it.
Do you leave the list?
Yes. Why is that?
Because it's going to contain all the zones.
Yeah, the container needs to store all the zones somewhere, and that's happening in the list.
I think that's strange happening where it's just splitting off the first number of the zip code. Possibly in the zone component.
Yeah, well, it's possible anyway. One thing you want to check is the API to see what data is really there. So remember, the API always speaks the truth. It's like whatever's on the API, like that's what's actually on my backend. Right? So you want to check your API first. The API does not lie. So if the API is rendering the correct data, then there's a mistake on the front end. Something's happening on the React code. So that's the first question you got to ask is, where is the data messed up?
Yeah.
So you tell me, what do you see on the API?
So it's splitting them at every single number in the zip code.
So your API does not, it's giving you like an array of like 1 and then 2. Okay. So chances are your split function right here is not like using the comma.
Oh, right. That's in zones.
Yeah. The split function might just have like nothing in there, like an empty string, which means it's just taking all the characters. Cool. So go ahead and confirm that before we continue. But so far so good. Is everyone with me?
Yep, that works.
Cool.
I think I was one.
Oh, let me get my power cable.
Dan, you make it look so easy. Driving me nuts.
I don't want to discourage you, but I don't want this on recording either. But at this point, this is insanely easy.
What?
But you will get to that point soon, I promise.
Maybe by like Thanksgiving.
Yeah. Hopefully by the weekend. I'm not trying to boast, but like, yeah.
Could you just for like a quick exercise move the zip code functionality like you were saying?
Zip code. Oh yeah, okay. So here, zones. So yeah, so Rob did bring up an excellent question, and this really does belong in the create zip code. So what we want to do is in the create zone, we want to do the pre-processing here, right? So we want to do let updated, and then object. Create the copy, right? Always create a copy when you're mutating state. And then before I forget, just send the copy back right here. In other words, there's no pre-processing going on. We're just creating a copy and spitting it right back out. And then here, because the reason I do stuff like that is because if I'm going to make a mistake, that's where it's going to be. So I already know my own kind of like weaknesses. Like if I'm going to mess it up, that's where I'm going to mess it up. So get that out of the way now. And then go back here. And then just run the update. And that's it. It's done. And then go back to the container and remove the other code. All right, so now we're back in the container and just, that's it. So now we're creating a copy for like no reason whatsoever. However, I'm just going to leave it there. Whoops. Okay. And then obviously test, make sure you didn't mess it up. So I'm just going to run a quick test. Test zone 2. And that's good. Fair question is why am I leaving this here, right? Because we will actually do even more pre-processing here eventually, hopefully in about a week or so. What kind of pre-processing? Well, if you think about it, when you create a comment, between these two fields, one of these shouldn't even be here, the username. You shouldn't be able to just change your username every single time, right? Because then you're creating a weird chat room, right? So really, what should happen? This username value should be pre-assigned by whoever's logged in, right? And then that value should be assigned to the zone, or the comment, I should say the comment, before you send it up. So over here, there will be some pre-processing. We will assign the user ID to the zone, whoever created the zone, the admin, before we send it up.
Back to create zone.
So we're going to create a whole profile model.
Yeah, we want to build this guy all the way out. So we want to create a user, a login, passwords, all that stuff, and then we have to assign all the right values to all the entities. So a zone is going to have a creator. Somebody created that zone. That whoever that person is should be the admin, the chief admin, or at least one of the admins. The create zone component will have no conception of that, because if it did, it would have to connect to the database. That's no bueno. Not going to happen. That's going to happen in the container. So in other words, the container will be responsible for attaching the user to the zone's admin array or ID. And that's how you think in React. Like, where does that data go? Right? That you want to get used to that thought process. Because again, it would be quite easy just to take this component and connect it to all the data anyway, and just make it work. It's so easy, it's tempting to do. That's my point. So you want to understand why not to do that, resist the temptation, and do it the right way. So this right here, these 5 or so lines of code seems like extra work for minimal benefit, if any benefit. Like, it's coming from a different background, like an Angular background or iOS, it's like, why would we do this? Right? But this is the React way. This is the right way. Okay, is everyone's code stable? So going back to here, don't lose sight of the actual functionality we're trying to achieve, which was what? When you click on one of these, right, when I click on one of these, it loads the corresponding comments over here. That's what we're trying to achieve. Right now that's not happening, but we're getting closer and closer to that, right? So right now we're trying to get to a point where we can even just select one. Right now, which one's selected? How do I even know? How should we know? There should be some sort of visual indicator. Like this should be underlined. That's probably the easiest way, right? Or maybe the entire background should be like a different color. There should be some sort of visual cue to indicate which zone is the selected zone. Good? So let's crank that out right now. So first of all, before I get to that, we're about to do some work in here. So which component should I be looking at? Zones container. The zones container. Okay? Because that's the list of zones. So we want to open up the zones container. Right here. And we want to determine which zone is the selected zone. So Angela, what we're about to do is we want to build in the functionality where when you select one of these zones, it'll visually look different. So we can quickly just identify which is the selected zone. Right? So when I hit this right here, something should happen. Like you should have like a different background color, maybe underline the text, whatever, you get the idea. But you should be somehow indicative of which one's selected. Okay? Good? So go into the zones container. I'm going to add another property called selected. And for now, it'll be 0. Good? The selected state value is simply the index number of the selected zone. So right now, the default is the first one, 0. The first zone that shows up is always the default selected zone. Simple, okay? So what we want to do is somehow indicate visually again which one is selected. So in the component, all of these, we want to add another property called isSelected. So isSelected. And we're going to default that to false. Good. And then if you go into the zone component, because remember, each one of these is its own component called zone, right? So if we go into the zone component, we can reference this property and make adjustments visually based on that property. So we can say here, I'm going to say const title equals this props is selected. Okay, so here I created basically an if-then statement that does nothing. So what I'm doing is I'm creating a variable called title. Okay, right now the value of the title is null every single time, so this is just nothing code. But this right here is saying if the isSelected property is true, use this value. Otherwise, use that value. Okay? So right now, we're going to take the title from here. This is effectively our title. We're going to get rid of it and put in the title like that. We're going to use the variable instead. Okay? And instead of null, we're just going to put in some text. Selected, not selected. So if I reload the components, they're all defaulted to not selected. You see that? Because when I loaded the components, what did I set the properties to every single time? False. They're selected to false every single time. Where am I doing that? Right here. Okay. So if I set these to true, what's going to happen? They're all selected. So now we have some visual confirmation as to what's selected and what's not, when it's selected and when it's not selected. Good? Before I continue, does everyone see the same behavior? Okay, so obviously we don't want just this text to show up. So what we had before down here is going to be the default for selected, meaning that the red text will mean that this is the selected zone. So I'm going to take what we had before and just paste it in here. Okay? And then I'm going to take what we have here and paste it as well. So I just pasted the same thing twice. But on the second one, I'm going to remove the style. Because remember, inside that style is where we made the text red. So if I reload the components again, they now all show up without red text. Good. They're pretty much the same, except I just removed this guy on the second one, the false component. Because if you remember, this is where we declared the text to be red inside the style. I mean, there's really no other place where you would do it. So if I remove it, the text is no longer red. It's wherever the default value was from the CSS, which is Bootstrap. Okay, so make sure you see the same behavior. So what are we doing? We're distinguishing the appearance based on whether or not the component is selected or not. Right, so if I go back to the container and I set that to true, now all the components are selected. So this should load as all red. Right, so now we have two different appearances based on whether or not selected or unselected. You guys with me so far? So now remember, the container itself has a state key called selected, which we currently have as set as 0, the default. The first component right now is what we're going to assign as selected. So this loop right here, this iteration, we grab the index value right here. That's I stands for index. So in other words, if I equals 0, it is selected, right? So we can, right here above the return, we want to create a Boolean, let selected equal I of this state selected. Oh, I spelled it wrong. Selected.
Right, true, it's just kind of like properly
Right here. Let me just wrap the text. This value right here is either true or false based on the condition here, right? So it's going to be true when it's 0 and false everywhere else, right? That's this value right here. Right, because we set it to 0. So when I is 0, the first one, this is true. Everywhere else is going to be false. So now that we have that Boolean properly assigned to reflect the state, we just throw in the Boolean instead of just hard coding. This is hard coding. Instead of hard coding it, we can just throw in the Boolean. So now we should see one red zone and a bunch of other blue ones. Now we have a selected zone. Okay, no dice. Where's it crashing?
we just keep saying can other property occur zone somewhere on the line 9.
Well, you like run it so I can see the error happen.
When I say in my head that's false, it showed up fine and good, but when I set to true, or this, that's
Where'd that close? So here is what the behavior we're going for is where you only have one selected zone, right? That's what we're trying to achieve. Right now it's hard coded, but just to make sure it works, if you change the state index value to 1, we want to make sure that now the second zone is the selected zone. We want to make sure that it's properly reflecting the correct one, which it is. Okay? So far, so good. Now, what we want to do is somehow attach a function, a listener, where when I click on this, right, it has to change the selected index. Okay, that's the goal right now. So when I click on this, I want to have it trigger a function that will change this value to whatever the new value is supposed to be. Okay, does that make sense? Now there's a lot of like considerations here. First of all, this link is nested where? It's inside the zone component, not the container, right? So in other words, we need another function in here that will pass back to the container what's been selected. Make sense? So what we want to do is inside the zone component in the loop, we want to create another, pass a function to it. We'll call it on select. This dot select zone. Rather than on select, I'm just going to call it select. So let's carefully consider what we're doing here. We're passing off a property called select, which we're passing off as select zone, a function. This function right now doesn't exist, so this will obviously not work, right? So we have to create this function in the container. Let's do that. And then always do what we always do. Just run a console log, make sure it even works. All right, do you see what we're doing here? So we're kind of reusing the same concept I was teaching earlier. We want to throw in a property called select. That property will be a function called select zone, which we're declaring up here is nothing more than a console log.
So it's still
In the container, correct. Okay, and notice I'm checking in on Webpack. Just get in the habit of doing that. Just every now and then, just check in on Webpack. Make sure it's not pissed off. Webpack is the boss. We all work for Webpack. Angela, you had a question?
Yeah, so just by putting the console log there, you're saying we should just do that on the...
Not yet. We haven't used it yet. But when we do, we just want to see a console log. We don't want to do too much coding before we confirm things are connected, which is like the #1 bad habit of beginners. They just do a ton of coding before they even get the most simple connections working. Everyone messes up the most simple connections, including me. I did that last night. So just get the basic connections working, and then we'll start coding out a bunch of stuff. Okay. So now we got to go into the zone component, right, and trigger this function at the right time. All right. So in the zone component, we want to trigger the function when you hit the anchor tag. Right. So here. I think the best way to do this. Let me test something real quick. I think I'm going to try and bind it to the header tag. Select header. Because if we can do it on the header tag, this would actually be a lot easier. I don't want to overcomplicate it if I don't have to. Okay, let's try this. All right, this will be much easier. Let's do it this way. So here, I'm binding a click handler to the header tag called onSelectTitle, and then I'm connecting it right here. This is a basic function connection. Like this is we've done this a bunch of times now. So this part shouldn't be new.
Is that the only place you're writing stuff on the zone page?
No, we're not done. So what I've done here is I've confirmed that this click handler has been successfully connected to that function. That's all I've done. You see there's nothing more than a console log, right? And I just wanted to make sure that the connection was successful. The reason I was testing is because typically you don't connect click handlers to header tags. That's not conventional. But in this case, this is a slight shortcut that I'm taking to reduce some of the code that we have to write. And again, this part shouldn't be new to anyone. We're just adding a click handler to this header tag, and then we're setting the function right here in just a console log. Okay? The real question is, what do we want to do in this console log? That's the real question. All right, so who can guess that part? What do we want to do inside this function right here?
Oh, you want to click the title of the,
Yeah, right here.
yeah.
Right.
Pass the index value back to
Well, we can't pass it until we call a certain function.
You gotta call this .prop.select.
Yeah, the select function. So this .props.select, it's a function though, right? Select. So this is the function that goes back to the container.
So how does anyone read that one?
Because in the container, we called the function select. And we decided to call it this property right here.
Right, no, I got that, but where, how is how is it referencing the file in the first place?
Which file?
The zones file.
It's not. This is how we're passing it a property called select. That property is a function. And when we
Oh, it's because when you export, everything is.
no. There's no importing or exporting going on. What's happening is when we have the zone component, we're giving it a property called select. Yeah, that's what we're calling it. We're calling the property select. That property is a function that we're calling also select zone. So it's like a function inside of a function. That's almost literally what it is, almost. So when we call the select function, we're actually calling this function, other way around, excuse me. When we're calling the select zone function, we're actually calling that function, which we're hoping to confirm right now. We still haven't confirmed it. So when I reload and I hit this first title, I should see 2 console logs now. That's what I'm hoping to see. See it? That's from the inside, that's from the container. So we've successfully confirmed that the view component is communicating to the container component. That's certainly happening because it's right there. Now that channel of communication has been achieved, now the question is, what do we want to pass back? Now we're on to what you were about to say, which is what?
the index value.
Yeah, we need to know which zone has been selected. So let's think this one through. So right here in the view component, when I call the function, I need to know which index to pass back. So this is it's a bit of a challenge. Like, how do I know what the index is?
You pass it in from zones.
So if I go back to zones, what do I do?
Oh, you just call key. It's already giving us the index. Oh no. In zone, can we just say key value equals I?
Put it in there in the zone tab.
Component, zone component. That's what Ryan was suggesting. So yeah, the answer is we can put in whatever we want to, right? So what should we do here?
Say key equals bracket I.
Shouldn't call it key
Key
though.
value.
We want the property name, right? It should be very indicative of its purpose, right? And the key, this is a special property by React. This has nothing to do with what we're. I really wish this didn't even have to be here, but React like mandates that we put it there. There is a good reason, which we'll get to in January. Like it's a little bit complicated, but here this is our property, so we should give it a very intuitive name, like what? Like what? Index. Index, position, zone index, whatever. But something that's clearly indicative of its purpose. So now that we have that, what do we do with it? Go back to zone and then do what? And then how do we know if this works or not?
I think we have to do if statement, like title inside.
Console log what?
The index when you click on it.
Sorry, one more time?
The index when you click. Just to see what happens.
Yes, let's do that.
So
So now if I reload, very good. We got 0 right there. We got 1 right there. We got 2, so forth and so on. So it's being picked up. Excellent. The real question is how do we pass it back?
did you not do that in the
Well, who are we passing it back to? Like this guy, this component, his job is effectively done. So where do we need to go back to? The container. And then do what?
set the state?
Almost.
Select zone.
Right, we have to receive it over here. In other words, we got to put an argument in right there. What should we call it? Index. That's what it is. And then do what? Not yet. Always console log. So I always console log index. So now we should see 0, 0, 1, 1. We should see the index on both ends. Right, that means it's being properly sent and received. And then on the container, what do we want to do with it? Now, Ryan, what do you want to do?
This sets through. Selected colon index.
And then do what?
Save and try that.
Test it. You guys see what I see? It's a lot of code to get one thing highlighted, right? The important thing here is, again, the thought process. Right? That's the important thing, is understanding how to pass the data back and forth and who's responsible for managing the data.
So it looks like if you scroll all the way down, and then you put test zone 2, the
Ooh, that's a problem.
A tag is, so you need to do a prevent default. Right?
Oh, yeah, we'll take care of that. I forgot to do that, sorry.
I was just wondering, like, where.
Yeah, we'll take care of that right away. Yeah. I just didn't want to get to that right now. But yeah, we have to fix that. So before I get to that, is everyone seeing this behavior?
I'm not getting the color switching. I don't know if it's just something in the styles.
Well, I mean, that's like fundamentally what we're going for, right? So when we first had it, were all your titles red like mine?
No.
So then you have to create a separate style where one is selected and one isn't. Angela brought up a pretty worthwhile thing to fix. So like if I go here on the bottom and press that, it will like go to the anchor tag on top. That's a pretty easy fix. So the way you do that is inside the zone component. We do prevent default.
Will it work on that? Because you put that on the page ahead.
Yeah, that part I don't know. We'll find out. Yeah, it works. So evidently the child HTML attributes are like being passed up. That's clearly what's going on. So the child tags are passing the event all the way up the chain. So that the H tag is effectively an anchor tag.
Mm-hmm.
Prevent default, what you should understand about that is these clicks have their own default behavior. Like when you hit an anchor tag, it goes to the link. That's the behavior, right? When you hit an A tag, a link, it goes to that link, the href. The prevent default means whatever you were going to do, don't do it. That's all it means. Like let us take care of it. Like whatever you were gonna do, don't, and we'll do it instead. Good. Is everyone have this working? Good. JD, good. Rob? What about you, Bob? Gonna reset this back to 0. That's what it should be. All right, I'm not going to do too much more coding today, but I want to. This is all moving towards a certain circumstance. So again, going back to the originally intended functionality, like when I press this right here, like that, what is supposed to happen over here?
Filters, comments.
Yeah, we should get a whole new set of comments that are specific to NYU versus Nomad, right? That's the intended functionality of this project, right? So what that means is, whatever I selected here, whatever is selected here, has to be passed to the comments right here. Right. This guy needs to know which zone is selected so it knows what comments to render. You guys with me? So this container has a value, selected, has a state attribute called selected that another container needs to know about. So now we have to deal with passing properties not from child to parent, but from like peer to peer, container to container. You see the discrepancy, the distinction? Right? So we have at least two containers or two components, or bottom line, more than one component, that needs to share a value, which is selected. Right? You guys see the problem? And that's the problem. One way we can do it is, don't forget, where is it? The home layout contains both containers. Right? The layout's kind of like the container of containers, but you don't really want to think of it that way because the word container is a special word in React. It's like a smart component. So we could add more listeners here, and then set the state, and then just have everything pass all the way back up to home. You see that? Do you see a problem with that approach though? Eventually that's going to get really hairy code. That's effectively treating React like Angular. That's essentially how Angular is organized. That's practically an MVC architecture. In other words, we do not want to do that. That's actually a bad idea. And unfortunately, that's pretty much how coding has been done in MVC frameworks before React. So in other words, my initial impulse a little over a year ago, was to do exactly that. But that's what an Angular dev would do. That's what a backbone developer would do. Right, so you want to disassociate that way of thinking and try to think in a React way. So from a React standpoint, well then how the hell do you think of it from a React way? So going back to the original problem, when you have two components that need to share data, share state, immediately you think Redux. Redux is the solution to that problem. Right, so we're approaching a point where our project is starting to get to a point where it's a little bit too complex for the current architecture. We need to start implementing more tools to handle the increase of complexity. Right? So that tool is Redux. So whenever we have at least more than one component that needs to share state. So this value right here, selected, is essentially shared state. We have to share it between the zones and the comments. Right now, only the zones has it. And we have to somehow get it to the comments. That's shared state. As soon as that situation arises, Redux is the answer. Okay? So at this juncture, we have to implement Redux. We're not going to do that tonight because that alone is going to be at least an hour. So what I want to do is clearly articulate where Redux comes in. That's the problem. Okay? Is that clear? Now, what Redux does is it creates a state for the entire project. One state object for the entire project, which is called the store. Okay, so really, this doesn't even belong here. This guy, selected. Where does it belong? In the store. And the store is like the state of the entire project. Okay? So when we implement Redux, we're going to add store and put this guy in the store. And then certain components will register to the store. We'll basically say, hey, store, I need you to tell me when certain things happen. We'll connect to the store, literally connect. That's the function name we're going to use. So certain components connect to the store. Which components do you think those are, by the way? No, in general. Containers. The containers are the ones that connect to the store. You see that? And then what Redux literally does, is it takes the values from the store and assigns them to the components as properties. So this shouldn't even really be in the state. This should be a property. This guy right here. Okay? And just like regular React, whenever the Redux store changes, all the components re-render. all the ones that are connected. Does that make sense? So like think of it as like plugged in. Like the containers are plugged in. They're plugged into the matrix, right? They're the ones that really have all the information. And whenever the state, the global state changes, or the store, all the connected components will re-render. They'll hear about it, and then they'll re-render.
But it only if there's a change.
Just like regular state. It's the same thought process. The same thought process. What's the thought process? Every time I change the state, the whole component re-renders. But within the context of what we're doing, that's only a one-to-one relationship, one component. Right? So again, the problem is, what if multiple components need to know about one value selected, which is exactly the situation we're in right now. When that happens, it's time for Redux to show up. Redux shows up and saves the day. Does that make sense? So then the question is how? How does it happen? Redux maintains a global state for the entire project called the store. All the data is saved in the store. And whenever the store changes in any way, the components hear about it and then re-render. But not all the components. Which ones? And which ones generally are those? The containers, right? And when a container reloads, all of its subcomponents, the views will reload with it. That's the Redux-like thinking, the mentality. Okay? So step one is just understanding what the hell Redux even does. Like, what is Redux? Why do we use it? Like, this is why. So Redux isn't the answer for everything, right? Like, if we only had comments or only had zones and that's it, we wouldn't need Redux. Or better yet, there's a reason why I set it up this way too. I could have put zones and comments into one big container. And then we wouldn't need Redux at all. In fact, that's how I do my demo presentations, because I can't do Redux in a demo. Yeah, Redux it's going to be way more than one demo. So if I put comments and zones in one big container called chat room, right, we wouldn't need Redux at all, because there's only one container. There's only one component that has all the data, right? So Redux wouldn't be necessary, right? But here I deliberately split it up, here and here, so that we would create that problem, the fundamental problem of this guy needs to know about something here, and right now they're not communicating, right? So that means it's time for Redux to come in. And again, I just want you to understand how Redux does its thing. Now, it has a store. The state is maintained in the store. Whenever the state changes, the components hear about it and re-render only if they care, only if they actually register for the updates through Connect. Okay, it's actually not that complicated from a broad level overview. Okay, that's how it works. However, the mechanics of how this happens are quite complicated. The actual literal logistics of how this takes place is pretty complicated. So actually, I'm probably just gonna have to like whiteboard this because it's just too much. So, any thoughts on Here we have the store, right? And we have components. We'll call this zones, and we'll call this comments. Right? And these guys will connect, and these guys have their own like subviews, which we already have, like comment and zone, right? And these guys connect to the store. And it's a two-way connection. So if the store changes in any way, those changes will propagate down to the components and trigger the re-render, right? So you can think of the app, the entire project as like one big component. Like that might be the best analogy, to be honest. Now the question is, how does this happen? So the store is a single global object that maintains a state, but that's kind of misleading. It's actually a collection of objects called reducers. So you have a bunch of reducers, Reducer. The reducers are individually responsible for maintaining the state for certain aspects of the project. For example, the zones will have its own reducer, and the comments will have its own reducer. And the reducers come together in the store. So although everyone keeps saying there's one global state management, which is true, it's a little misleading because it's really a collection of sub-modules that are combined in the store. Okay? Make sense? So the zones has its own reducer. Comments has its own reducer, which maintains the state. What do I mean by that? We have a list of comments, right? That list will now go in here. No longer in here, it'll go in here. We have a list of zones. That list will now go in here, right? No longer in here. And more importantly, the selected zone will also go in here. Okay? That's the distinction. So right away you can start seeing some changes we have to make from a code standpoint, right? That list inside the zones component no longer belongs here. It's going to go in here. Okay? So that's, we throw in the state inside the reducers, the state like values. Good? Now, when certain things happen, when certain events happen of a data significance, like when you make an API call, right, and we download a list of zones, that's a significant event, right? That's something happened. Those things that happen are called actions. So when the zones component mounts, right? Who remembers the first thing we did? We make an API call for zones, right? And then those zones come in, and then we set the list in here. That's going to change now. When the zones come in, we have to send that data to the reducer. Okay? And that, we send the payload from here to here via what's called an action. So we have to define actions that deliver information from the component back to the store, or the reducer more accurately. So when the API returns data, we make the API call. We get a bunch of data. We take that data, we package it inside what's called an action. We send that action back to the store. The reducer then takes it and updates the state. So everywhere we said like object.assign, and all that stuff, that's going to happen now in the reducer, because this is where the state is going to be updated. You with me? And then once that hits the store, once the updates are made and you hit the store, what's going to happen? It's going to propagate all the changes. All these guys will re-render. And that's the Redux flow. You see that? So this is called the one-way data flow. This is probably the second most important concept in React, where all data starts from here, the first one being set state. Like, you change state, things update. That is the defining quality of React. But the one-way data flow is extremely important to understand. You have all your data here, right? Whenever anything changes, it just flows all the way down to here, and that's it. That's it. And all these re-trigger. So whenever an action occurs, the question is, we got to get that action, the result of that action, back to the store. The store does its thing through the reducer, updates, and then all the components hear about it and reloads or re-renders. Okay? So that's the flow. One more detail. Actions have names, or what's called types, which is basically just a name. Actions have types, which is just a name. Those types are stored in a constants file. So it's a sort of a minor detail. I just want to, when I get to it, I just want to understand why we're setting it up.
So we list all the names or types in a constants file. That's it. Okay, so all the actions happen are named or like enumerated in a constants file. That's all I need to point out as to what that is. Okay? Does that make sense? So again, the important thing is that you have your store, which keeps all the data, et cetera, and that happens in the reducers. Reducers maintain state for individual like sections of the app. So we're going to have a zones reducer, a comments reducer, and that's the organization. When anything of significance happens, that creates an action. We send that action to the corresponding reducer. The reducers are the real workload, the workhorses here. They do all the work. They take the action and they update the data. They update the data, so they add a new comment, they remove a comment, they edit a comment. That all happens up here. And then it hits the store, and then all the components reload, re-render. That's Redux. Got it? Okay, so in the remaining 15 minutes or so, I'm going to set up the Redux environment, but don't follow me, just watch me. Okay? So go ahead and stop the video.